Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. We tackle all kinds of topics here, and today's is going to be something I think everyone can relate to.
Yeah.
We're talking about women's trousers.
Yeah.
Like, just trousers,
Right.
but it's not going to be just about, like, the fashion and all of that. We're going to look at all the different angles from the way different cultures and religions think about women's trousers, and we've gathered some really fascinating material for you guys, from some general information about different styles to some specific perspectives within the Islamic, Jewish, and Christian traditions.
Yeah, this is one of those deep dives that you realize, there's so much more to something,
Yeah.
than you thought.
Yeah.
I mean, just trousers, right?
Right.
But it's like, whoa, there's a lot to unpack here.
Exactly.
And the aim is to give you a really good understanding of why there are so many different viewpoints on this seemingly simple garment.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, right, everybody wears trousers, or almost everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with the basics. Let's just get like a general lay of the land when it comes to women's trousers. Like, what are the different types?
Okay.
One of our sources actually talks about how important trousers have become in the wardrobe of a modern woman. It's a good balance between fashion, comfort, and even elegance. And it's amazing how many different styles there are. Right?
It is, yeah. So when you talk about women's trousers, I mean, there's so many different types.
Right.
The material we have actually breaks it down into several different categories.
Okay.
Which I think is helpful.
Yeah.
So let's start with the classics. I mean, we've got jeans. Everyone knows jeans.
Okay.
And even within jeans, you have, like your straight leg, skinny jeans. You got the wide leg or the flare jeans, which kind of keep coming back into fashion.
Yeah, they come and go.
And then you've got ripped jeans and high-waisted jeans.
Oh, yeah, and those are all
So many different types.
Yeah, thanks,
And then you move into like casual trousers.
Yeah, okay.
These are the trousers that are made from cotton or linen.
Okay.
You've got your straight cut trousers, chinos.
Oh, yeah, chinos.
And these are just great for work or just like casual daily wear.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
everyday wear.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have trousers that are more for specific purposes like sweatpants or joggers. Those are really comfortable. You can wear them when you're exercising or just relaxing at home.
Oh, yeah.
And then there are shorts.
Right.
Denim shorts, classic shorts, great for summer, or if you just want a more modern look.
Okay.
Then there are wide trousers, palazzo pants.
Oh, yeah.
Which are often made from light fabrics like silk or chiffon.
Yeah.
Those can be really elegant for evening events.
Right. And then there's like leather trousers, right, which are a little edgier.
Yes.
Yeah, you can wear them for an evening event or in the winter when it's cold.
Yeah.
And then there are also printed trousers.
Oh, yeah.
With all kinds of patterns and designs, floral prints, stripes, if you want to stand out a little bit.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, it's a really wide variety.
It is.
Like, how do people even decide what to wear?
That's a good question. And what's interesting is the source we have actually offers some guidance on which types of trousers are suitable for which body type.
Oh, okay.
So it says if you're a tall woman, you
Yeah.
can pretty much wear any style.
Okay.
But wide leg and skinny jeans actually look really good.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
For those of us who are a little shorter,
Mm-hmm.
the recommendation is to wear high-waisted trousers
Okay.
or slim-fitting styles
Yeah.
because that kind of elongates your figure.
It makes you look taller.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And then if you're full-figured,
Mm-hmm.
straight or wide-leg trousers with a high waist are recommended.
Okay.
And that is supposed to enhance your elegance. So these are just like general tips.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting to see that,
Right.
different cuts and styles can really change how the trousers look
Yeah.
on different people.
Okay, so now that we know like the basic styles,
Yeah.
what about styling? Like, how do you actually
Right.
put an outfit together with these?
So our source actually offers some basic advice.
Okay.
They say for a casual everyday look,
Yeah.
a simple blouse or a t-shirt works really well with trousers.
Okay. Yeah.
For work, you could wear a more elegant blouse
Right.
or a jacket.
Okay.
And then in terms of shoes, it really depends on the occasion.
Right.
You can wear heels, sneakers, whatever you like.
Right. Okay.
So you can see that trousers are a really versatile piece
Yeah.
of clothing in the modern wardrobe.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now that we've covered like the basics of like what trousers are and all the different kinds, let's get into the really interesting stuff. Let's look at the Islamic perspective on women's trousers. Okay.
Because we have some material here that gets really in depth.
Yeah, we do. And it's really fascinating to see this different perspective. And the Islamic perspective is guided by the Quran, the Holy Book of Islam, and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad.
Right.
And the key principles here are modesty, covering and avoiding resemblance to men or to non-believers.
Okay, so we've got one source here. It's titled Si Sesso Sensasi.
Okay.
And that translates to women's trousers, the Sharia perspective.
Okay.
And this source really dives deep into the specific conditions that make trousers acceptable for women in Islam.
Right.
Can you explain a little bit about what Sharia is for people who don't know?
So Sharia is Islamic law.
Okay.
And it's derived from the Quran and the Sunnah.
Okay.
The Sunnah is the teachings and practices of the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
So it's a comprehensive guide on how Muslims should live their lives.
Okay.
And this includes dress code. Okay, so women's trousers. The Sharia perspective, what does it say?
So the first thing that it emphasizes is that trousers shouldn't be tight.
Okay.
They shouldn't describe the shape of the body. And it mentions this hadith, which is a saying or an action of the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
And the hadith talks about women who are clothed yet naked.
Oh, wow. That's a powerful image.
It is. And the understanding is that even if you're wearing clothing, like trousers, for example, if they are so tight that they reveal the shape of your body, then it's as if you're not wearing anything at all.
Okay.
Because the purpose of clothing in Islam is to cover and conceal.
Right.
And specifically, the source mentions the shape of the legs and thighs.
Right, okay.
So that should not be visible.
Okay, so it's really about modesty then.
Exactly, yeah. It's about modesty, and it's about maintaining distinct gender roles in terms of appearance.
Okay, interesting. So the trousers can't be tight. What else?
They also can't be transparent.
Oh, right.
Because that would defeat the purpose of covering.
Yeah.
And they must cover the entire leg.
Okay.
They can't be short.
Okay, so full length.
Full length, yeah.
Right.
And here's something that you might not immediately think of.
Okay.
They also cannot resemble men's clothing.
Oh, okay.
And there's another hadith that is mentioned in this source that actually curses men who try to imitate women.
Oh, wow.
And women who try to imitate men.
Okay, so it's a very serious matter.
It is.
Okay, so that makes sense. So the trousers have to be loose, they have to cover the whole leg, and they can't look like men's trousers?
Exactly.
So can women even wear trousers at all, according to Islamic law?
That's the question.
Yeah.
Right? And the answer is, yes, they can.
Okay.
But only if those specific conditions are met.
Okay.
So they have to be loose-fitting, definitely not tight. And the source gives examples, like wide harem pants or loose-fitting Sharia trousers.
Sharia. Okay.
Sharia means in accordance with Islamic law.
Oh, okay. So specifically made for that purpose.
Yeah. So the style, the cut, the tailoring, all of that has to be taken into consideration.
Right. So it can't just be any loose trousers.
Right.
Okay.
So it has to be something that is traditionally considered women's.
Okay, so even if the trousers are loose and they cover the whole leg and they don't look like men's trousers, are there any other conditions?
Yes. So even if they meet all of those requirements, ideally they should be worn with a long outer garment.
Oh, okay.
Such as a jilbab or an abaya.
Oh, right.
Especially when a woman is outside of her home.
Okay.
This ensures that the entire body is covered.
Right.
So that's really important. And also, the trousers themselves shouldn't be something that could be considered tempting or attention-grabbing.
Okay, like what would be an example of that?
Like really tight leather pants.
Oh, right. Yeah.
For example.
Yeah.
That would not be appropriate.
Okay, so not just the style, but also the material.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It all plays a role.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what about different opinions within Islam? Like, are there different schools of thought on this?
Yeah, so it's really interesting.
Okay.
Because you do have different opinions among Islamic scholars.
Okay.
Some scholars say that it's fine for women to wear trousers as long as they meet all of those conditions we talked about.
Right.
So they have to be loose and wide, and they have to be worn with a full outer covering.
Okay.
But then you have other scholars who are a little more cautious.
Okay.
They say that even wide trousers can be problematic.
Why is that?
Because they could still be associated with women who don't observe hijab.
Right.
Or even with men's attire.
Okay.
And so they prefer the more traditional loose garments, like long skirts or abayas.
They're playing it safe.
Exactly.
Okay.
They're erring on the side of caution.
Right.
When it comes to modesty.
Okay, so what are some alternatives then? Like, what can Muslim women wear if they don't want to wear trousers?
Well, the sources actually offer some alternatives.
Okay.
You have long skirts that cover the ankles. You have wide abayas or jilbabs that cover the whole body. And then you have those wide harem-style trousers that we mentioned.
Okay.
And they also give some practical advice, like avoid tight or ripped styles.
Right.
Choose modest colors that aren't too flashy. And if your trousers are a little bit fitted, make sure you wear a long top or an abaya.
Right.
Over them.
Okay. That makes sense. So basically, wide trousers that don't reveal anything and that aren't like men's trousers are okay.
Right.
But it's always better to be safe
Exactly.
and wear loose garments.
Yeah, from a religious perspective.
Right.
That's the safer option.
Okay, so the sources are very clear about this, right? It's forbidden to wear trousers and go outside in them if they resemble men's clothing.
Right. And it even references that hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari.
Right.
Which is one of the most authoritative collections of hadith.
Yeah.
So it's taken very seriously.
Okay, so it's not just about the fit, but it's about the overall style and how it's perceived.
Yeah, exactly. And even if the trousers don't look like men's clothing, if they're tight and they show the shape of the body, that's also not allowed.
Right.
Because that's considered immodest.
Right, and that goes back to that hadith about women clothed yet naked.
Yeah.
And the verse in the Quran about not showing off your adornments.
Yeah, exactly. Surah An-Nur.
Yeah.
It says that women should not display their adornment except what is ordinarily apparent.
Right.
And the understanding is that the shape of the body itself, when it's emphasized by tight clothing, is considered an adornment that should be covered.
Okay, so just to like sum up the general guidelines for Islamic dress for women.
Yeah.
It has to be covering. It has to be thick so you can't see through it. It has to be loose. And it can't look like men's clothing or like clothing of women who are immodest.
Yes. And it shouldn't resemble the clothing of non-believers either.
Right. Okay.
So there are a lot of different things to keep in mind.
Okay, and there were also some specific guidelines about like outerwear.
Oh, right. Yeah. So when it comes to outerwear, it shouldn't be worn to gain fame or attention.
Right.
It shouldn't be overly decorative or go against modesty, and it shouldn't be perfumed when worn in public.
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of really specific guidelines there.
It's a very comprehensive framework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's move on to the Jewish and Christian perspectives.
Okay.
And we have this source called SUBSCRIBE. Will I say great you?
Which means women's trousers among Jews and Christians.
Right.
And this source talks about how there are a lot of different views within these two faiths.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting is that it's not as uniform as the Islamic perspective.
Right.
So, for example, in Judaism, there's no explicit prohibition against women wearing trousers.
Okay.
But if you look at Orthodox Jews, religious women typically wear long skirts and modest dresses, and they generally avoid trousers.
Okay. Why is that?
So this is based on their interpretation of Jewish law that prohibits women from wearing clothes that are associated with men.
Okay, so they see trousers as being masculine.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's all about maintaining those gender distinctions.
Right. Okay. So Orthodox Jewish women generally don't wear trousers.
Right.
But are there any exceptions?
Well, the source actually mentions that some Orthodox women will wear very wide trousers underneath their skirts.
Oh, okay.
For warmth.
Okay.
So it's okay if you can't see them.
Yeah, it seems like the concern is more about whether the trousers are visible and whether they're seen as aligning with modesty and traditional gendered clothing.
Right. Okay, so what about other Jewish denominations?
So conservative and Reform Jews generally don't have a problem with women wearing trousers.
Okay.
Especially if they're not too tight or revealing.
Okay.
Many women in those branches of Judaism wear trousers regularly.
Right. So it's really up to the individual.
Yeah, and it also depends on like cultural context and community practices. And there's this concept in Judaism called sneipnut, which refers to modest dress and behavior. So while it doesn't specifically mention trousers, it's about covering the body and avoiding clothes that are too revealing or attention-grabbing. So that principle
is followed by many religious Jewish women. And that can definitely influence their choices about clothing.
Okay, so now what about Christianity? What does the source say about that?
Okay, so similar to Judaism, there's no specific text in Christianity that forbids women from wearing trousers. However, just like with Judaism, there are variations in practice among different Christian denominations.
Okay, so what are some examples?
So in more conservative Christian circles, like some Protestant and Orthodox traditions, some churches might encourage women to wear long skirts instead of trousers. Especially during prayer services or Mass.
And why is that?
They believe that skirts are more modest and more feminine. And the source even gives the example of Coptic Christians in Egypt, where women do wear trousers, but they typically wear them with long tops.
So it's like a layering.
Yeah, for that extra coverage. But for the majority of Christians, especially those in more moderate denominations and Catholicism, there's generally no religious objection to women wearing trousers. Especially if they're not too tight or revealing. And the source just says that in Western cultures, where Christianity is the dominant religion, it's very common for women to wear trousers.
It's totally normal.
Exactly. But there is this verse in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 22.5, that some people bring up. It says, "A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man. Nor shall a man put on a woman's garment. For all who do such things are an abomination to the Lord your God."
Okay, so some people interpret that as a prohibition.
Some people use that verse to argue that women shouldn't wear trousers because they see trousers as traditionally men's clothing. However, the source points out that this verse has been interpreted in many different ways throughout history.
Of course.
And many people see it as a prohibition against complete cross-dressing rather than specific items of clothing.
So it's like a general...
exactly. And to really clarify all these different perspectives, the source provides this table that summarizes the views on trousers in Islam, Orthodox Judaism, and conservative Christianity. And then it contrasts those views with the more liberal interpretations within Judaism and Christianity.
So what's the overall takeaway from all of this?
So the takeaway is that neither Judaism nor Christianity have a blanket ban on trousers. But stricter adherents within both faiths often prefer skirts because they see them as more modest and more in line with traditional gender roles. In Islam, trousers are allowed, but only with those conditions that we talked about.
The covering and the looseness.
And not resembling men's clothing. And of course, in Western culture, trousers have become the norm for women.
And that's largely because of the Christian background of Western culture.
Okay. So now let's talk about a specific type of trousers. Tight trousers. And we have this source here called Sathan A. the Siosian, which translates to tight women's trousers. And this source really gets into the Islamic rulings regarding tight trousers.
So what it says is that tight women's trousers are forbidden in Islam if they are so form-fitting that they describe the shape of the body, like the thighs and the legs. Because that violates the Islamic principles of covering and modesty. And the source actually gives evidence for this ruling from both the Quran and the Sunnah. So it quotes this verse from the Quran.
Surah An-Nur 24.31. It says that women should not display their adornments except what is ordinarily apparent.
Okay.
So the understanding is that tight trousers reveal the shape of the body.
Yeah.
Which is considered an adornment that should be covered.
Okay, so the shape of the body is the adornment.
Exactly.
Right.
And then there's also that hadith about women clothed yet naked.
Right.
Which is mentioned again in this context.
Okay.
And the source also reminds us that if those tight trousers resemble men's clothing, then that's another reason why they're not allowed.
Right. Okay.
It's all about maintaining those gender distinctions.
Right. Okay.
So just to repeat, the conditions for trousers that are permissible for women in Islam.
Okay.
They have to be loose-fitting.
Okay.
They have to be non-transparent. They have to cover the entire leg.
Right.
They shouldn't resemble men's clothing.
Okay.
And they should be worn with an additional covering, like a jilbab or an abaya.
Right.
When outside of the home.
Okay. So what about wearing tight trousers at home?
So the source actually addresses that question.
Okay.
It says that some scholars permit women to wear tight trousers in front of their husbands only.
Okay.
As long as they're not overly revealing.
Okay.
But even then, loose trousers are preferred.
Okay, so it's still better.
Yeah, it's still better to
err on the side of caution.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So what are some good alternatives to tight trousers?
Well, the source actually offers some alternatives.
Okay.
It mentions wide leg trousers.
Okay.
Like harem pants or palazzo pants.
Yeah.
It also mentions long, loose skirts and full-length abayas or jilbabs.
Right.
So there are a lot of options.
Okay. And it also mentions the opinions of some prominent Islamic scholars.
Yeah, it actually summarizes the fatwas or religious rulings of scholars like Ibn Baz, Ibn Uthaymin, and Al-Bani. And all of these scholars either cautioned against or prohibited tight trousers.
And why is that?
Because they don't provide adequate covering.
Right.
And they could lead to temptation.
Yeah. Okay, so the bottom line is tight trousers are not okay in Islam.
Exactly. They're not permissible.
Right.
Because they don't cover the body properly.
Yeah.
And they could lead to temptation or resemble men's clothing.
Right. Okay.
And Muslim women are encouraged to wear loose clothing, especially outside the home.
Okay.
And the source points out that there are a lot of stylish and modest alternatives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Available.
Yeah, so there are no excuses.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
You could still look good.
Yeah.
And be modest.
Exactly. Okay. So now let's talk about a specific style of trousers.
Okay.
That is mentioned in the sources. The wide Pakistani trousers.
Oh, right. Yeah. Those are interesting.
Yeah.
We have this source here called Say By the Say So.
Okay.
Which means the wide Pakistani trousers.
Okay.
And it talks about these trousers in detail.
Okay.
So these wide Pakistani trousers, which are often called shalwar, are a very traditional part of clothing in Pakistan and India.
Okay.
And they're typically worn with a long shirt called a kameez.
Okay.
And a scarf called a dupatta.
So that whole outfit.
Yeah, that's the traditional outfit.
Right. Okay.
And the source emphasizes how loose and comfortable these trousers are.
Okay. Expert speaker.